Hey, well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back at my alma mater for a few days and have a chance to talk with you about a recent composition of mine. This will be the second performance today after I've spoken a little bit about it. And I'd really like to thank Jack and all the musicians and Clark and the school for the opportunity to be here. So the piece is called Seven Beginnings. And this piece was inspired by the birth of my daughter. Accordingly, it's a kind of origin story. But most origin stories that I know tend to posit a singular origin, once upon a time, in the beginning. But I've experienced firsthand now that early human life is marked by a series of beginnings, and quite a few of them have associated sound images. For the piece, I've chosen 7. And they are the first noises that we hear in the womb, the cry of childbirth, the song of a parent beginning to soothe the baby in their first moments together, the beginnings of speech in babble, the emergence of sense in the first meaningful words, the child's recognition of her name and the associated sense of self, and the child's eventual ability to draw their experiences together into a coherent story. To address this subject, I wanted to use both music and words. I think that music and words together are magic. But there seemed to be an opportunity here to move beyond the standard methods of text setting in which words are either sung or narrated. The concept of this piece involves a human voice emerging gradually out of noise. And this seemed like an invitation to develop a musical form that follows a similar trajectory. So I decided to use projection to present a text that I wrote and to create musical settings whose relation to that text evolves over the course of the 7 beginnings. I'm going to take the rest of my time today to talk a little bit about how this works. So in the first beginning, the electronics track that you'll hear actually includes some sounds that were recorded in utero. We didn't make those ourselves, I found them on the internet. But additionally, I had a recording session with some musicians and we got some improvised sounds that I then treated in order to simulate the auditory experience inside. And basically, there are sounds from outside that make it in, that are audible, but everything is filtered above about 500 hertz. So everything has this very muffly quality and only the lowest frequencies really make it in. The second and third beginnings focus on fairly literal sound images. I don't think they require very much explanation. But the fourth beginning shifts from sounds heard by the infant to sounds that she produces herself. It's about early vocal explorations. And so to do this, I made a mashup of various recordings of my daughter babbling, and then transcribed them for the ensemble. And I'm going to play you a little bit of the original sound file, and maybe you'll recognize it in the instrumental sounds that you'll hear during the performance. Okay, so beginnings 5 to 7 then are marked by increasingly veridical representations of speech. So I recorded myself reading the text and then used computer software to help create a transcription. In beginning 5, the transcription appears in only one instrument, while the others create a soundscape around it. In beginning 6, more of the instruments are drawn into the transcription, and since this was probably the greatest technical challenge in composing, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here with reference to an example. So here's a recording of me reading the first few words of beginning number 6. The 6th beginning was the self. So with the help of the software AudioSculpt, I first notated the fundamental line, which we hear as the pitch or speech melody. I then analyzed the distribution of sound energy above it for each different syllable, producing harmonies based on the energy distributions of the different vowels. And finally, I transcribed the rhythm, attempting to preserve the speech patterns as closely as I could while still producing something performable by the ensemble. So I'm going to go through those a little bit more slowly, each aspect of melody, harmony, and rhythm one at a time. So let's have a look at what this, what it actually looks like in AudioSculpt right here. So basically from the bottom to the top is the whole range of human hearing. As you can see, most of the stuff is happening in about the bottom half. But let's zoom into where the action is down here. And these approximately horizontal lines that you see that are brighter than everything else are the strongest frequency components in the sound, or what we call partials. The one on the very bottom tends to correspond to what we hear as the pitch, and AudioSculpt makes it really nice and easy. If you can see in this box up here in the corner, as I move the cursor around, it tells me exactly what is the frequency and the corresponding letter name for the pitch. And I can even go a step further, and if I go to analysis, fundamental frequency analysis, then it gives me this nice little line that traces the pitch that we're going to hear. So it makes it quite a lot easier for transcribing. But you notice now that these are kind of squiggly-ish lines. They're not usually very flat, and that makes sense, of course. When we're speaking, our voices are modulating constantly. We don't tend to hold a single pitch the way that you would a musical note. So there was often a judgment call to be made about where in this approximate range I would put the note down. For this one here, you can see it goes from about A2 up to about C#3, and I made this one a C. With this one here, it goes about a G3. And so that's just the process. And then, okay, I got a feeling this is going to play me talking again, so just ignore that. There we go. All right, and so that's what it ends up looking like on the staff, just in terms of the pitch. Then deciding how to harmonize this melody, deciding what notes to assign to the other instruments above the melody, followed a similar kind of process, but was a bit more complicated. For one thing, the number of strong partials changes from one vowel to another, and sometimes there's more partials than there are instruments to work with. For another thing, the partials often go quite high in frequency, like beyond what's easily controlled by musical instruments. So I thought it was a bit of a fool's errand to try and transcribe the vowels very exactly. And instead of that, you can still see the spectrograph in the corner there. You can see how the distribution changes from one syllable to the next, and some of them have more energy up high and others have less. So for brighter vowels like E that have a lot of energy up top, then I would give a bigger spread to the transcribed syllable. And for ones like ah that have less energy high, then everything would come down further, closer to the fundamental. And so we end up with something about like that. It's a little bit confusing to read because the bassoon is the second one from the bottom and everything else is distributed elsewhere. But you get the point. And basically, the flute and the oboe end up with these crazy disjunct lines where they have to leap from one partial to another in order to get the energy balance approximating what we hear as vowels. So then there is the rhythmic notation, which was definitely a challenge. Writing these rhythms down was largely a process of analytical listening, trying to decide what meters, tempo changes, and rhythmical figures were faithful to what I was hearing, but also readable in standard musical notation. I didn't have much in the way of computer assistance for that, honestly, because I don't know of a software that would be very helpful with it. So if any of you do know of one and want to tell me, I would love to hear. The result looks fairly complex on the page, and I wouldn't say that's the most complex. It gets worse. But I don't find that the sounding result is all that perceptually complex, because being grounded in speech rhythm helps the music to come across, at least to my ears, as rather natural and familiar. So in the seventh beginning, the musical simulation is joined by real speech, completing the process of emergence from noise to the human voice. Thank you very much for your attention today, and thanks again to everybody for making this happen. I hope you enjoy Seven Beginnings.